Paint Care is all about keeping it simple for district residents. They make recycling leftover paint easy with convenient locations like your local paint store. Paint Care has 3 simple rules for painting smarter and reducing waste. 1, buy the right amount of paint for the job. 2, use up what's left. And 3, recycle the rest. To learn more or find a paint drop site near you, visit paintcare.org/3simplerules. That's paintcare.org/3simplerules. Today on CityCast DC, the Trump administration is pressuring public schools to abandon any programming related to what they call DEI, or else those schools will lose federal funding. And earlier this month, there was ICE activity at Cooke Elementary School in Adams Morgan. Scott Goldstein, the executive director of a local NGO called Empower Ed, is here to share how schools are handling these threats and what it means for local students. Today's Tuesday, April 8th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Scott, thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So the Trump administration just rolled out a new policy saying that they're giving public schools nationwide just over a week to prove that they have ended all DEI practices. What does this even mean? Like, what specific programs do they want gone?
This is another one of those threats where they're trying to threaten basically the foundation of how we support all students in an inclusive way in DC. And we don't know what that means, I think, in particular. But if it means things like ending our efforts to ensure that all students feel a sense of belonging and inclusion in school, to make sure that our LGBTQ students, our trans students specifically, feel protected in school, that students with disabilities don't have an equity lens focus on the way that we fund and the way we support them in schools. If we stop, for example, efforts at ensuring that there's teacher diversity and representation at our school, that is not something that we should go along with. And I think it's up to us to forcefully push back against that. DC is obviously in a very precarious position to push back, given the specific threats to our autonomy and home rule. But it's also a slippery slope. And if we continue to go along with every threat from the federal government, what is the point of our home rule to begin with? We have to be able to fight for the programs that are essential for our students and families.
How have DC leaders been preparing to push back against this?
It's hard to know what the leader strategy is, because a big part of the leader strategy is to try to be as quiet as possible with their response, because they do want to try to preserve home rule and our autonomy. And while I think that is very valuable and important, we also are at a moment where we need to mobilize people. We did a Recess at the Capitol event just a couple of weeks ago, where we brought hundreds of DC families and educators and students to the Capitol building to influence the Senate to make up this $1 billion in our budget. And there's just such a huge grassroots mobilization right now. People are ready to be activated by their leaders to fight back against this. But unfortunately, the strategy from a lot of DC leadership has been to try to lay low. And I think while you can understand the motivation in some ways, given the threat to us, we really need leaders to rally us in this moment, because this is a marathon. We have 4 years of these threats coming at us. So we're not going to avoid the fight. But if we keep letting the bully take our lunch money, he's going to come back for more and more every time.
What kind of organizing or pushback would you like to see? It sounds like you're saying you're not really seeing a lot of response from leaders, and maybe that makes sense because they're trying to lay low, go under the radar. But what kind of response would you like to be seeing in this moment?
First, I think, like I said, I'd love to see our leaders really rallying the public to this moment. And in many ways, we can think about doing that. For example, this threat to the $1 billion of DC's budget that was taken out in the continuing resolution and we're now trying to fix affected this current budget. But the city council will have before it, within days, the budget for FY26, for the coming year's budget. And they have control over that. And what I would like to see, for example, is a real understanding that if this is the one thing that we can really control right now, we need to ask those among us who have the resources to pay more, to do more, to make sure that those people who are being threatened by the federal government have the resources they need from our city. So I think we should be doing more to support those in poverty, to support our students in Title I schools. And that means budget investments. It means making sure that we communicate to families that we intend to protect our immigrant students in their schools. So there's a lot they could be doing, both verbally and financially through our budgets, to make sure that we know that we have the backs of our students who are most vulnerable.
It sounds like the broader issue really facing DC schools is that Trump is trying to dismantle the Department of Education. On a practical level, what would that mean for our schools?
It's hard to know because they do a lot of this without a plan. In a sense, there is a plan, right? Project 2025, and we saw these threats coming to dismantle the Department of Education. But like a lot of things this administration does, they don't have a plan for day 2 and day 3 and day 4. And so when they try to move all the parts of the Department of Education to a different agency, that's going to cause a lot of disruption. It's probably going to cause payments to freeze or to be paused for a really critical program like for students with disabilities. So even though they say those things aren't intended or may not happen, the clumsiness of it all and really the wrecking ball they're taking to that agency means that students are going to suffer, funding is going to suffer, and principals and school leaders, they just don't have the predictability to know what they can fund and support for the coming year. So, we're in touch with teachers and principals every day who are just worried about what this is going to mean, not just for their funding, but for their students who they're trying so hard to help them recover from the pandemic and so many other things.
How much does DC actually rely on the Department of Education right now? Like, what does it do for DC schools?
So we get a little under 10% of our budget from the Department of Education. That includes things like Title I funding that goes to the highest poverty schools, Title II funding that supports teacher professional development. But also think about this as special education, because the reason in a way that we have the Department of Education in the first place is that there were not adequate civil rights protections for our communities that are most vulnerable, especially now in this administration, but in particular for students with disabilities who did not have realized their right to a free public education, an appropriate public education. And so making sure that we're providing the students who have an IEP, an individualized education plan, all the services that they're owed, that's something the Department of Education is supposed to be looking out for and requiring. And it's also the funding that goes directly to support high poverty schools. And schools use that for out of school time programming or for teacher professional development or for tutoring or for programs that are essential to helping our students do better. And so a lot of those programs could very much be at risk.
And the threat of this new DEI policy is really that the government will pull funding from schools. And of course, getting rid of the Department of Education entirely would also do that. What would be the on the ground impacts of DC potentially losing this funding?
Yeah, if we lose Title I funding, that's an enormous amount of funding. It supports a whole range of things. It could be that, students do not have the supports for out of school time programs, for before and after care programs, for additional instructional coaching or tutors who come in and push in to support the students who need individualized help the most. And there's a wide range of services, kind of rich experiential learning that students get because of these additional dollars. But these are really the dollars that go to support the students who are struggling the most and who need individualized and differentiated support. So when we lose that funding, we lose all the strategies that we are doing. And DC has seen growth with these groups. We're not where we need to be, but we've seen some growth. And we just need to send the message hands off, right, to the federal government that we're working on this and we have a strong education community here and we are working collectively to help those students improve. And the loss of that funding would mean a loss of a lot of the programs we've started in the last 3 or 4 years that has actually helped DC improve results faster than other districts.
And it sounds like what you're saying is that potentially student performance could fall if this is all threatened.
I think there's no doubt. I mean, because we know that some of these programs that we're putting into place are improving student performance very directly. We know that the more well-rounded an education students get, the more they're activated by interest, that they have the arts and language programs, that the more they get individualized support or tutoring, that helps them with their academic outcomes. And those are the programs directly that would be at risk with a loss of this funding. So we do want to see our city leaders step up. And again, we need to raise additional revenue. We need to raise revenue and taxes on the highest earners to make sure that if these threats do come to pass, we are not shorting our schools the money that they need, because they need more than they have now. And we're now in a fight just to keep what we have. But we're not going to continue our progress doing the bare minimum. So we both need to push back against the federal government, but also demand that our mayor and our council here in DC pass a budget that not only does the bare minimum, but does better than we did in past years, because we know we could expect to see threats to funding and other things from the federal government over the next year.
Ever wondered why mosquitoes bite you? Or maybe you're curious about policy, like solving the housing shortage or bridging the digital divide. Or maybe you want to hear it all. After the Fact, a podcast by Pew, breaks down today's big issues with expert insights and real stories. Whether you're into the research or the personal stories behind it, we've got you covered. Get the stories behind the stats. Listen to After the Fact wherever you get your podcasts. If you're a CityCast superfan, you have definitely heard us singing the praises of our longtime supporter, Paulson and Nace. Big news! Paulson and Nace is now Nace Law Group. Same great team, just with a new name. When you are hurt by the negligence of others, you want a lawyer that will actually fight for you, not one that will settle for the bare minimum. Nace's compassionate lawyers fight to bring cases to juries so you can get everything you deserve. If you've been hurt or lost a loved one because of someone else's mistake or negligence, call Nace Law Group for a no-obligation consultation. Visit www.washingtondcinjurylawyers.com or call 202-463-1999. Is there any benefit at all to the Department of Education becoming smaller? I know that there are probably people listening who are like, well, the Department of Education, these federal programs are also bloated. Maybe it'll be good if it's leaner and, more efficient. Is there any idea about that?
I mean, I think like all of these efforts with DOGE, there's always some waste, fraud, and abuse in government, right? And there's always a way that we can make it more efficient. But the way that they're doing it is totally reckless and destroying these programs kind of from the start. So sure, there would be ways to look at the Department of Education and see if there are programs that should be moved or programs that should be downside. But there's also probably some that should be bolstered. And I don't think we're just taking a detailed look at it. It's just a wrecking ball. And then on the other side of that, we don't know where student loan payments are going to be processed in the next couple of months. We don't know who's doing oversight for our students with special needs. So there's a lot of things that are falling by the wayside because of the totally reckless way they're doing this.
Yeah, it seems like the bottom line is if you genuinely cared about preventing things like fraud and waste, you would be really giving a lot of scrutiny to how you're coming at those issues, not just kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater and taking a wrecking ball to the whole thing.
Yeah, and let me give a very specific example because we are funded actually to do educator wellness work in schools by grants that started as federal grants. They are now luckily local money, but this is money that supports us being able to go into schools and support the educator well-being and retention of DC educators. That started in the pandemic era as a way to support the health and well-being of our teachers in schools because we're seeing a real teacher retention crisis. That's critically important work. It's effective. The schools we've worked with for more than a couple of years have seen more than a 15% increase in their retention, and other organizations that are bringing counseling services and behavioral and mental health supports into schools. These are critical things we need, and sometimes they are funded by the government. And I think the kind of attitude we've seen from Elon Musk is, if the money is giving money to nonprofits, it must be waste. Nonprofits are doing a lot of critical work in partnership with our schools. And instead of taking a look at specifically what that work is and what the outcomes are, we're just trying to take it all out in one fell swoop. And there's a huge infrastructure here of nonprofits doing amazing work to bring better learning and learning outcomes to our students.
And you're referring to your group, Empower Ed, there, right?
Exactly right. We are one of the groups that have done this educator wellness and retention work, but there's groups doing out of school time programming in DC. There's groups that are doing that tutoring support, groups that are bringing in experiential learning and field trips to DC students. It's a wide range of organizations that receive funding. Luckily, a lot of that is local for us and not from the federal government, but some of it does get funded by the Department of Education, or that schools are able to contract with organizations because of the Title II funding they get from the Department of Ed. So we do not want to see all of that in flux because we know students come to school because of these kinds of programs. My kids are in elementary school here in DC, and one of the programs that they love is Food Prints, which comes into schools, and they have school gardens and they help them grow food and understand nutrition and healthy eating. Students throughout our city love that program. And these are the kinds of programs that we invest in DC because we know students come to school when it feels relevant and it feels exciting for their life. And it's not just the math and reading, but all of those things, both core academics and additional enrichment options will suffer if our schools have less funding.
Let's switch gears a little bit because we did hear about the ICE activity at several DC schools recently. Can you tell us what happened?
So the Homeland Security Investigation Unit showed up at a school, HD Cooke, last week, and they were trying to apprehend a school nurse. Now, nurses are contracted and not directly employees of the school, but they were trying to apprehend them apparently in the parking lot. And luckily what happened in this case is the school employees were well prepared. They stepped in and intervened, demanded, I believe, a judicial warrant signed by a judge, which is what is required. And they were unable to produce that and eventually backed off. And so we are grateful for our school-based employees that they stepped up in that moment. We also need additional training, though, for all school employees to make sure that they understand how to handle a situation like that, what to demand if ICE or Homeland Security were to come to our school facilities, and to understand the great disruption that does, because we have immigrant students in our schools and families who are afraid to send their kids to school right now because of these threats. And we've seen already attendance go down among some of these groups. And so these attacks have a chilling effect. It is not just the individual incidents that we may hear about. It's the chilling effect on the educators and the staff who are going to have a hard time coming in the next day, on the students and the trauma that this does. And so all of those effects are really important. And we need all of our schools to be well trained, well prepared to deal with these in the coming years.
Well, do you think that teachers and school administrators do feel prepared or clear on what they're meant to do if this happens?
I think we're getting better at that. I think at the beginning we were not sharing information as well as we needed to. And I think now we have started to provide training, and both through DC public schools and in the charter sector, the DC Charter Alliance has been wonderful at providing resources to charter schools and training to them to understand what to do in these situations. So we're getting to a better place with the training, but we also need to make clear from our city leaders that it is our intention not to cooperate with these things with the federal government. It is our law and it is our policy that MPD, our local police, do not cooperate with ICE or immigration enforcement. And we've heard mixed messages from city leaders about that. And that is really damaging, because the executive order that was passed recently and threats from conservatives like at the Heritage Foundation have suggested they want to force DC into a position where we're aiding those efforts. And that is not DC values and is not something we should be going along with locally.
What do our current protocols look like? You mentioned that that DC law is that MPD will not cooperate with these kinds of things. What do our current protocols look like?
So with the school protocols, the Office of the Attorney General, DC Attorney General, made clear and sent out guidance to all schools about what the protocols should be if ICE were to come onto a campus, for example. And those protocols were well followed in this incident. And there's extensive FAQs about what to do in certain situations and how to make sure they have central legal help in the case that this occurs. So we do have protocols for those individual events. But in terms of assistance with immigration enforcement more widely, I do think there's been some gray from city leaders in this area. And I understand, again, the threat that we're under, but we can't have our local elected officials essentially held hostage by the federal government for the next 4 years. We have the right to develop local policy, local budgets, and do those based on DC values.
Springfest at Lowe's means can't miss savings for your home and lawn. Right now, buy 3 bags, get 3 free on Miracle-Gro 3/4 cubic foot all-purpose garden soil. Plus, buy 2, get 1 free on select exterior paint and stain via mail-in rebate. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 4/16, excludes Alaska and Hawaii. While supplies last, selection varies by location. See rebate form for complete list of eligible products. Offer excludes clearance and mistints and can't be combined with any other offer, promotion, discount, or coupon.
Get ready for Netflix's gripping new medical drama, Pulse. Set in a cutting-edge Miami trauma center, third-year resident Dr. Danny Sims is unexpectedly thrust into a promotion when beloved Chief Resident Dr. Xander Phillips gets suspended. Then, with the emotional and physical stakes at their highest, a storm will push the hospital and its residents to their limits. Witness how life can change in a heartbeat when you're operating under pressure. Watch Pulse, only on Netflix.
How did the city react to this ICE activity at schools?
There's a lot of fear. And I think initially, even though this was a confirmed event, it seemed like this was happening in multiple schools on the same day. And what you hear is a lot of times there are immigration officials, not just at a school, but near a school that can really affect families. And so, like I said, I think there was a reaction of fear and a little bit of panic. But also, I think people did a good job making sure not to spread panic, but to make sure that people did feel comfortable and that the situation was under control. So you got to applaud all the people who stepped up in this situation and the hundreds and hundreds of volunteers throughout the city who have stepped up through all different kinds of efforts, like Defend DC, where we have the Defend DC Education Coalition, like Free DC that is fighting for DC autonomy. And through these groups and the action, so many ordinary residents in DC have stepped up to take action. And people were passing through group chats in school communities and across the city. Don't panic. Here's the protocol. Here's what we should do. And so we're really just proud of DC's community and the way they've stepped up.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it really is a story of neighbors supporting neighbors, and just the importance of in this moment in particular, having each other's backs and showing up for each other.
Right after the election, I think just everyone felt so exhausted in a way. It's like we fought so hard and now we're going to face this threat for a long time. And that feeling continues in many ways. I think we're all working a second job essentially now trying to fight back against these many things. But there is just such a huge appetite for taking action amongst neighbors. And the kinds of people who are not normally involved in local government or local action have really stepped up and gotten involved in it. So it really has been inspiring to see how many people have stepped up and to represent their school communities, to share information with each other, to defend their neighbors. So it really has been inspirational. And I think we can see a lot more of that, but we do need leaders to also step up and make sure that we are on the same page about defending DC.
Well, I want to kind of drill into that because people listening might be thinking like, yes, I want to be involved in this way. I want to be able to step up to support my community. What did those residents do? And what can folks listening to this do if this ever comes up again?
Yeah, so there's several things. I mean, we have formed under Empower Ed that's facilitating a Defend DC public education group. And you can go to our website, which is defenddceducation.com, and take a look at all the ways that you can get involved in that. Free DC is another effort that's organizing folks up on the Hill to take on those battles for DC autonomy. And there are a lot of ways you can get involved in these organizations. But I would say the biggest thing that people are doing is really organizing in their individual communities, especially if you belong to a school. We've seen parent organizations organize, educators working together with parents to organize and push back. And so really what I would say is connect with the people in your school first and see what organizing is happening and what assistance they need for the efforts that are already underway. And if there's not one, step up, communicate with us, get in touch with us. We'll share information so that we're trying to build a network of essentially school defense captains across the whole city to make sure that when things happen, we can share information quickly and that we can learn what's happening in our schools. So when there is a threat to, for example, DEI programs, we can learn, is a school stepping up to defend this work? Or are schools, our LEAs, our district defending this work? Or are they backing down from it and canceling programs and making shifts? Because we want to know all those things. And so being connected to your school at the local level or your school community is the best first step.
For someone who wants to be involved in this organizing work, but maybe hasn't really done this kind of thing before, doesn't know where to start, what does this organizing look like? Is it protest? Is it organizing folks to knock doors and do phones? What does it generally look like to get started with this kind of organizing?
Yeah, it's a range of things, and we make sure there are avenues for everybody, no matter what you're comfortable with. So if you're comfortable just showing up to a rally and you don't want to speak, we have a lane for you. If you're comfortable knocking on doors but not comfortable making phone calls, or the reverse, we have a role for you. If all you want to do to start is be in a chat and share information with your neighbors about your concerns, pass out information in your neighborhood to people you're already connected with, we have a role for that. So no matter how people want to get involved, we have ways to make sure they're involved. We have some people, for example, whose role is just to do research on threats that we perceive might be coming so that they could give us information to help us plan in advance. So again, defenddceducation.com. We have a sign-up form there, and people can find lots of ways to get involved in that effort. But there are so many ways, and we will make sure that everybody feels comfortable and gets the kind of training they need to step up in the ways they feel comfortable with too.
You mentioned that you have kids who are educated in DC. Are they at DCPS?
They're in DCPS, yeah.
How do you feel about this as a parent with kids in the DC school system?
My kids are at a school with a very, very large immigrant population. That's the majority of the population in our school. I am enormously proud of the way leaders have stepped up the community in our school to organize. And so, I certainly fear every day, though, for the friends of my children who have real fears about what this will mean for them and their families. And unfortunately, we know people who have, personally who are thinking about, should I stay here, even though they have legal status, right? Because we've seen on attacks on immigrants, even those who have legal status. And so, we have, friends and thinking about just the great friends of our children and the way that they are, being threatened by this. And it's really sad because, families are really being uprooted in many ways. And so we just need to make sure that those, especially with the privilege and the power to speak out and to take activism on their behalf, can do that. And we can be looking out for our neighbors.
Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, share it with a DCPS parent. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.